Okay.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming. I'm kind of excited to do this afternoon. It should be kind of fun. Um, we've got a lot of ground to cover, and I've got an opportunity in here for a couple of breaks, so that should be good. Um, just a little bit of housekeeping before we start. This is set up to have both a live demonstration plus lots of on-screen work. So you might get the most out of it if you could set your monitor up the way I'm showing it here so that you just be in speaker view and not gallery view. And then there's a little drop down there that shows side by side, which will allow the speaker, who is currently me, to be side by side the slides that we're showing on the screen. And then there's a little divider line between the two that you can move back and forth to make the two slides a good size to see. And I think you probably want to make the actual slide a little bit smaller and me a little bit bigger. I think that would work. And then Lance, could I get you to arrange to mute everybody else's mics?
I have just done that.
Okay, that's good. I can still hear you. So hopefully you can all still hear me. I can't see you because of the way I have it set up down here. So this is kind of strange. It's like I am talking to a wall of monitors, but I can't see any of you. So I was talking with Jen earlier. The hardest thing about doing this is there's not a lot of feedback. So I would imagine that if most of you decide to partake of a wonderful sunny afternoon, which we didn't think we were going to get, and go all out and play golf or sun in the backyard, I might never know. So we'll just see how all that goes. Anyhow, I hope we are going to have some fun this afternoon. We have a fair amount of material to cover. The title of this is basically Lightroom system architecture and how to avoid a digital disaster, which is really my way of trying to make the subject of how Lightroom and whatever stores files on your hard drives a little bit more exciting than just saying, you know, like this is where they are. But that's what we're really going to do. We're going to do a really deep dive here into how Lightroom works. Is this technical? As long as you're reasonably comfortable using Finder on a Mac or Windows Explorer on a PC to move files and folders around or click on them and rename them. It's no more technical than that. I'm trying to keep it fairly perceptual because of the goal that I'm trying to accomplish here this afternoon. So what we're trying to accomplish is this deep dive down into to Lightroom. We're going to look exactly how Lightroom is built and stored on your hard drive, how you probably want to hold picture image files on your hard drives. I'm going to show you in detail how to back all of this up because bad things happen, as you know. And then we're going to take a break. And then after we come back from the break, we're going to interactively break Lightroom. And I'm going to show you how to put it back together. I brought some tools and props with me this afternoon. I brought my Mac here. But don't worry, this is not all about Macs because this is also a PC. So everything that I say applies equally to Macs and PCs. The one thing that I'll probably get tired of saying is it's the Command key on a Mac and the Control key on a PC, but I'm sure by now all of you know that, so I won't dwell on that. But everything that I say and all of the recommendations will apply to both Macs and PCs. So I brought a Mac, I brought a hard drive, I brought some external hard drives, brought lots of things to actually demonstrate this. Now, how I'm actually doing this is a little bit different. I'm doing this off my Mac laptop, and I don't have 8 drives plugged into my Mac laptop. But what I do have is I have all of the demo catalogs and files and simulated hard drives on a hard drive like this, so that I can switch back and forth between them and show them to you. So for example, I've shown things like our images are coming off drive E. Well, E, F, X, W, that all makes sense in a Windows world. Just think of those being volume names in the Mac world, and it's all the same. But I have a number of simulated drives set up so that we can cross things back and forth, just the way you might do at home if you had a pile of hard drives. The other thing I want to make clear is the Lightroom version that I'm using. I'm using Lightroom Classic Desktop, the one that's been around for a long time. Everything that I say applies to Lightroom 6, which is the standalone annual version that some people are still running, but it also applies equally well to the subscription version. But I'm not talking about Lightroom CC Cloud. I'm not talking about that. My view had been that most photographers like us in camera clubs are probably still a bit confused over which of those two Lightrooms to use, and they don't see very much benefit in the cloud version. I'm going to do another episode a couple of weeks down the road where we'll talk about the two different Lightrooms, but my thinking going forward is that most of us are going to be dealing with Lightroom Classic, the traditional one that we've dealt with. That uses hard drives that you have in your house. It can make use of the cloud for sharing, but that's principally not where we're going. So we're going to save the whole discussion of synchronization and cloud Lightroom and all of that stuff for another day, because I really think that photographers like us that are going on photo shoots and trips and cruises. Is anybody going on a cruise again this year? I don't know. We may never shoot enough. I used to think that, we would shoot thousands of photos in a year, but I could only take so many pictures of my dog. But anyhow, once this all clears and we're going on trips and shoots again, I think what I'm saying applies mostly to Lightroom Classic and hard drives. The other thing is, and I'm just get it out here, I'm fairly opinionated on this. I've got some very strong views as to how I would recommend that people do things. And we'll get into that in a second as to why I'm thinking those ways. But from the beginning, where we're going to start in a minute till the end, it's all a system that all kind of connects together. And I think you'll see the logic of it in the end. I'm also going to need to drink a fair amount of water this afternoon because it's a lot warmer than we started. Okay, so with that kind of an introduction out of the way, I want to just go back and lay a framework for where we are with Lightroom today and why it is the program it is today, because I think this gets to the heart of understanding what's happening here. And if I think back 30, 40 years ago when I first started taking pictures, I was taking them with, actually, truth be told, it was an Olympus film camera, which I still have, but it sadly doesn't work anymore. But I had that camera, and we had to learn certain skills. We had to learn all kinds of manual light metering in those days. We didn't have a lot of fancy automatic settings on the camera. We had skills to learn for that. But we also, back in those days, we used darkroom and we took film. So back in those days, we shot negatives. And in fact, I still have envelopes and envelopes of negatives that I shot 40 years ago. And the thing about those and prints that we made was that we could see and we could feel and we could touch them. They were there and they were real things. And I think that took a lot of the mystery out of it. What do we have now? We've got digital cameras with hard drives and digital sensors and so much more automation and so much more technology. I think you could say that it's good because you can take all the digital pictures you want for free now. It's no longer, a couple of bucks for a roll of film and $12 to get it developed. And who would ever think of going to Africa and taking 30,000 colored slides? I mean, we can do so much more for free now. But the cost of negatives and slides has translated into something else. It's translated into the cost of hard drives and storage and computers. So you can take all the digital pictures that you want for free. It's just keeping them that costs you money. The problem with hard drives is that hard drives are not perfect. It's not if your hard drive fails, it's when it fails. Because if you run hard drives long enough, you are guaranteed to have what I refer to as a digital event or a digital disaster. Something's going to happen and something's going to get lost. Here's a slide. I'm not going to go through it, but I can think of at least a dozen reasons why hard drives fail. And any system that we set up needs to accommodate in one way or another in equal portions, each of these possibilities, because I think they can all happen at just about any point in time. Now, hard drives are getting better. I was reading about a hard drive the other day, and apparently it has a mean time between failure of over 3 million hours. And I thought about that for a second. I said, what the heck is 3 million hours? So I got my calculator out and I divided that into days. It's still a big number. And then I divided it into years and realized, well, that hard drive is supposed to last for 342 years. I said, that's probably good enough. But you have to realize that that's only the mean time between failures. Some might last longer and some might not last as long. And I'm of the particular view that I don't care if you have a hard drive that's supposed to last 342 years. For whatever one of those 12 reasons, it could die tomorrow. And you need to have a plan in place for when that happens. The other thing that happens with regard to Lightroom, and I'll speak about Lightroom specifically for a second in the confusion of it, is that because people don't really understand how Lightroom is storing things in their catalogs and on their folders, I think they get to the point where they have a lot of confusion about it. It's just a big black box and your pictures are stored in there. And, you know, my God, if anything goes wrong, you're in trouble. I mean, I hear things all the time, like I shot 40 pictures yesterday and I can't find them in my Lightroom catalog today. Or Lightroom has lost all of my pictures is one that comes up from time to time. I go on some of the forums. Adobe has a forum, Victoria Brampton has a forum. There's a lot of them out there, and I read through things, and I'm seeing that there are a lot of issues that people have because they're just not comfortable with the architecture and what happens when something goes wrong, or they create the problem in the first place. So coming out of this afternoon, having set that up, what I'd like to do is come away really with 5 goals. Let's get Lightroom set up on your computer systems properly in the first place so that you're going to avoid a digital disaster. Then secondly, we're going to teach you some bad things that you shouldn't do, so don't do the bad things. However, when things go wrong, we want you to be able to recognize, oh, that's not right, but I think I know how to fix it. Then we're going to give you some skills to fix it. And then finally, I am going to unabashedly encourage you to set aside some of your film budget this year for good quality hard drives. So with that set up as a background, let's talk just specifically about Lightroom now in terms of how it works. Lightroom is a program like no other piece of software, if you think about it. It operates with a paradigm that's unlike anything that we've been used to in the computer industry since the dawn of PCs back in the 80s. So if we were at a classroom setting here, I'd be all getting you to put your hands up and say, how many have used, Microsoft Word or Excel or PowerPoint or even Photoshop, right? Well, virtually everybody has. And there's a difference between those programs. For example, let's just talk about Microsoft Word for a second. How does it work? You got to do something, so you either open up Microsoft Word, click on File, Open, run around in your folders, find the document that you want to work on. Maybe it's a will, or maybe it's meeting minutes or an agenda or something like that. You find it and you open it. Or you do it the other way. You start with Finder on the Mac or Explorer on the the PC, you click around in your hard drive and drill down to it, and then you find the file that you want, you double click on it, Word opens, and there you go. Okay, so you had to find the document and open it. Well, then what do? You run around and you make a whole pile of edits to it, bold, underscore, you move some paragraphs, you add new paragraphs, you fix some spelling mistakes, you do all those, and then you save it and close it. We don't do that in Lightroom. When you start Lightroom, Lightroom opens up with a grid on your screen like I'm showing on the slide there, and your whole world is right in front of you. So you click one picture to the other, you look at it, you double click it, it gets big on the screen. You go into develop mode, you make it brighter or darker, and then you think, oh, there's another one that I want to change just like that. So you skip over to that one and you make changes there as well, right? There is no open, there is no save, there is no close, which confounds the heck out of people because people ask the question all the time, like, how do I save my work in Lightroom? Well, you don't have to, it's all automatic. But here's something else. When you work in a Word document or an Excel spreadsheet, you're working in this, you're editing the top, or you're going down to the bottom, or you're moving a little piece here, or you're moving a little piece there. But what do you do in Lightroom? You operate on the whole document, the whole file, the whole image all at once by moving the exposure slider, or the vibrance slider, or the saturation slider, right? You're making adjustments to the whole document. Well, you don't do that in Word. You know, in Word, I mean, maybe once in a blue moon, you grab the whole document and change it all to 18-point type size, but that's a relatively low activity. Similarly, in Lightroom, it's only people who've been using the program for a little while and have got some good skills that are going in and doing adjustment brushes and masks and clones and heals, so they're operating on pieces of the document. So what you do with the two pieces of software is completely at the opposite ends of the spectrum. But then in Lightroom, you do something really funny. I mean, you never in a Word document open it up, make a bunch of changes, and then make the same change to another 30 wills or another 30 meeting agendas. But in Lightroom, if you do a photo shoot with a model, and you've done 130 pictures, and you need to change the color temperature for the skin, the exposure, open the shadows a little bit because they were all done with the same exposure, you might well say, bang, now paste those on to the next 130, and I'll use that as my starting point. Again, total opposite. Now it actually starts to get really interesting. In most programs, like Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Photoshop in particular, your edits are like a stack of plates in the cafeteria, aren't they? Every time you make an edit, they stack up. And eventually you get to the point where you say, oops, I don't want to do that. And then you say, well, how do I fix that? Well, in virtually all the programs going back a long time, you press Command-Z or Control-Z, and you go back a level. And so the same order that you go in to make the changes, you have to reverse out of that, stepping back down. Well, Lightroom doesn't work like that at all, does it? In Lightroom, it's not a stack. The stack is there, but you can go into the middle of the stack of plates and pull a change out. You can reverse any change that you've made at any point in time without having to reverse back down the stack of plates, which is actually pretty cool because you can't do that in Microsoft Word. Virtually always you have to work all the way from the top back, fix what you completely ruined, and then move all the way forward again. But when you leave Microsoft Word and you save that document, or Excel, or Photoshop in particular, and then you reopen it again, the stack of plates is gone. You don't have that anymore. Your edits are lost between runs of the program, but not so in Lightroom. The Lightroom stack, the history stack, is infinite. There is no limit in the software as to how many steps you can save. Photoshop, I think, defaults to 15. If you have lots of memory, some people set it up to 100. But in Lightroom, you don't even need to think about it. You lose all of your edits in between invocations of the program in Photoshop and Word and that sort of thing. But in Lightroom, you actually get to keep them. But now we get into two very magical things about Lightroom. The order that you make your changes doesn't matter. You can make a whole pile of little exposure adjustments and then a contrast adjustment and then a color adjustment, and then go back and change your exposure and your contrast again. And the order that you do those things doesn't matter. It doesn't even make a difference with regard to whether or not you do spot healings and corrections before or after you make your exposure adjustments. And then at the end or the beginning, you can make geometry adjustments to, tilt your windows or square your parallel lines off. So the order of operations doesn't matter. Imagine trying that in a Word document. But then here is the most magical thing of all of Lightroom. At the end, you've made all of these changes. You've worked on your photos, you've made 100 edits, you've gone from dull to glamorous, and you haven't changed anything at all. Because Lightroom, in order to do this, doesn't actually change the image on your hard drive. Your original RAW and JPEG images that you brought in from your camera are left alone. It's these critical things, these differences that tell us the changes that we need to make to our system to set it up right to accommodate Lightroom. So at the end of the day, what's Lightroom? It's a Swiss Army knife. It does all of this magic, but it's a database or a library, if you like, in the sense that it has a record of all of your images. It's a photo editor, a non-destructive photo editor, so you can improve your photos, and it's also a media publisher. So if you roll all that in, it's something like 7 modules, and compare that to Word, which basically edits a document, or Excel, which does a spreadsheet. There's a lot to cover in Lightroom. So with that said as a background, what I want to do now is not even talk about Lightroom for the next few minutes. I want to talk about the implications of what I've just said in terms of how you set a hard drive up to work properly with Lightroom. So I happen to have brought my hard drive today. Here it is. It's an external hard drive. I'm pretending that this one is a Western Digital. This particular hard drive has only one folder on it. At the top, it's got a folder on it called Film, but inside it, there are a lot of other folders. So it's got a top level and then a whole bunch of photos underneath it. And the top level is very, very important, because if we set up our hard drives, especially our external hard drives, with one top level folder and put everything else underneath it, then it makes backup and the ability to look at our photo drives much easier. Now, I think a lot of people have been doing this for a long time. This is not a particularly new idea, but I do see lots of Lightroom catalogs where, yeah, this is mostly the case, but stuff is spread around on the desktop, on the system drive. Things start to move around after a while. So the discipline is to start with one drive and one top level. So what's in that? Well, this is a very simplified version. Here are the folders that I've got. I got a couple of folders representing years. So I have a 2013 and 2014. If I'd had a bigger set of drawers, I could have done more examples. But this is the concept of storing most of your photo shoots by year. I mean, when you take a photo shoot, you go and you shoot a model, or you go out for a day on a hike and you shoot some stuff, or you do a day birding, for example, down at one of the preserves. You got to bring those photos back. They've got to get stored somewhere on your hard drive. So in a lot of cases, storing simply by year, and then within that month, and then within that photo sheet is a really good logical way to work. So it would look something like this. You'd open up your 2013, and there'd be a pile of folders in there with the various months like June, July, August, September, October, November. And if I opened up June, for example, I would probably find that I had some specific photos in there. And these are the raw photos coming off your hard drive, because they've got to sit someplace on your computer. So I would presumably have a similar folder in here for 2014. and so forth. So I got folders in here for the various months in 2014. You get the idea. On the next slide, you can see a slightly more elaborate example which you'd adapt. I've personally found that years work great for a lot of stuff, but honestly, you get to the point where you probably need a project folder because some things are not really time-based. I mean, you may be going back and revisiting, you know, a particular subject area, and maybe you'll have some years within a certain project. One of the ones that I have on my hard drive is food and cooking, so I have a lot of barbecue photos. So I don't tend to intersperse them into the year folders. They go into that project folder. And trips is another case. Rather than remembering that the Iceland trip was in July of 2018, I go to the trips folder and there's Iceland in July of 2018. But the key thing is this has to exist someplace on your computer. And so when you import to Lightroom, when you store, whether you're doing it with Lightroom or maybe you're thinking of a different kind of photo editor that you might do in the future, the images have to go on your hard drive someplace, and you need this kind of organization for it. And the key thing is that it's under one top level name. So let's go on and look at this a little bit more. Jordan did an excellent presentation for us about 3 weeks ago where he talked about once you get your images in, you can do star ratings with 1 to 5, do color labels, flags and picks. You can do keywords, collections and smart collections to help organize that. So we're not going to spend any time on that because Jordan did that excellently, but that would be the next thing. But looking at the hard drive, specifically talking about hard drives, this is where we really need to take and narrow down. The recommendation is that you have one external hard drive on your system that is your master drive. And I'm recommending an external hard drive as opposed to one inside your case. So for example, if we open up our system case here, you know, we have this kind of hard drive. This happens to be an old Seagate. They don't always look like this anymore. The newer ones are solid state devices and they're a bit smaller. But these are devices that are in your system case. And you might even have 1 or 2 of them. But here's the problem. They're in your system case. So if your computer dies, then you've got to get the photos out of your system case. If you need to take the computer in for repair, then unless you take the drive out of the computer, then you're sending your photo assets into the repair shop. And I don't know about you, but I would be giving very strict instructions to the computer technicians not to touch my Lightroom catalog. I haven't seen very many successful things where the computer has quotes on gone into the shop and come back with Lightroom intact. So sending all your photos in, not a good idea. But maybe you've got privacy concerns for this kind of thing as well. So if you keep your photos, your actual image storage out of your system case on an external hard drive, then disconnecting it is as simple as just unplugging it. So how big should this be? Everybody's going to be a little bit different. I know some people in this group need well north of 8 terabytes. I'm sort of in the 4 to 6 range. Some people starting out might not need that much, but you do need to buy a drive that is large enough to hold all of your image assets. So how do you figure that out? The easiest way is to go into either Finder or Explorer and right-click on your top-level film and do Get Info or Properties, and then be patient. The computer will run around and add up the total amount of space that folder is using, including all of its subfolders. And if you take a look at the example on the screen, you can see that this one that I used adds up to 2.4 terabytes. So in terms of choosing an external drive, how big should it be? A couple of rules of thumb. I think at the easiest way to say it is it should be big enough to hold everything that you have now and for 2 to 3 years. Or another way it just might be to say everything that you have now and double it. So why do I say 2 to 3 years? Well, most manufacturer warranties on hard drives are in the 2 to 3 year time frame now. So if this is your primary photo storage, if this is where you're keeping all of your assets, you probably want to have that on a relatively new drive, not a very old one. And so when that drive begins to run out of capacity in 2 to 3 years, it could be moved to the role of a backup drive. And at that point, you could go to Best Buy or Amazon and buy a brand new hard drive. And for whatever it would cost, it probably doesn't cost that much more than it does today, but its capacity will have increased. And you'd be able to take and plug that in as your primary drive. And I'm going to show you how to do that in a few minutes. But keeping this online with all of your assets in one place has a couple of important benefits. First of all, it's more fun because you've got all your pictures there. So starting at film and going through your year folders, your project folders, everything that you have done is there and it's cataloged in Lightroom. So that's one fun thing. But secondly, hard drives are at their most vulnerable after you've turned them on, turn them off, and then turn them back on. If a drive is going to fail, there's a really high probability that if it's been sitting in a drawer for a year or two, you plug it back in and it will die. Or you don't have the right power adapter for it. Or you've used the wrong one, or you've lost the power adapter. So things stored off on hard drives that you're not powering on are at a very real risk of loss. You know, if you go back over time and take a look at all the different technologies that we've had for storing digital photos, I mean, wow, way back at the beginning, we had floppy disks and diskettes. And you may laugh at that, but I actually did have kind of a toy digital camera back as early as 1991 that took a very small image. I think it was 240 by 80. It worked, and I could put several on a diskette. Well, eventually diskettes went away, and then what do we get? Oh, we got zip drives, SideQuest drives, and then we got hard drives, and hard drives were better. Well, I remember the first time that I got a 1 gigabyte hard drive, and my God, I thought that was all the space, you know, in the world. That was sometime in the early 1990s. But our needs, you know, for more space continue to grow. So hard drives went from 1 gigabyte to 4 to 8 to 80. We crossed the 100 mark, and then eventually, you know, we got to terabyte drives. But the advantage to that was that compared to any other technology like zip disks or CDs, DVDs, Blu-rays, or whatever, it's the only technology that's actually kept pace, that as our needs grow, we have a technology that we can move to. So if you outgrow the space on your existing external hard drive today, it's a relatively easy process, providing you have it set up this way, to go buy a new one, copy everything over to it, tell Lightroom that you are now running off your new drive, and away you go. But that only comes if you've gone through the exercise of consolidating. So there is a piece of work that you need to do here as part of your homework. You need to do an inventory of your digital assets lying around on various hard drives, and then add that up and make a plan to restructure it in this way. And then we'll talk a little bit later on how we're going to get those things from hard drives back into Lightroom. But here's the most amazing thing going into this. I remember when I got that 1 gigabyte hard drive, how big it was. And then as I grew through other hard drives, I was always able to find something with enough capacity to handle it. And external hard drives that you're looking at now are 2, 4, 8 terabyte. In fact, I did a little bit of research, and there's a bit of a sweet spot right now in 4 terabyte hard drives. They're not terribly expensive, maybe $130 to $160. 6s and 8s and 12s are a bit more expensive. But even if you were to outgrow an 8 or a 10, there are all kinds of other options. I mean, I'm showing a simple external hard drive here, like the Western Digitals. But this one over here, for example, which you can see, is 15 terabytes. So that is 15,000 times the size of my original 1 gigabyte hard drive. So you need to take a look at acquiring this, and I've got some recommendations online for you, but we're not stopping there. You can't have just one. If you have everything on one hard drive, you truly have all your eggs in one basket. So this needs a backup. So down here, I happen to have another external hard drive, and I made this one a CD. But what is this really? Okay, it's this kind of thing. It can be a small one like this that doesn't even need a power supply. That could be an option, or it could be the more traditional Western digital ones that kind of look like this that you've seen around. These are called My Books. Lots of drives in this kind of size exist in 2, 4, 8, for example. This is only a half. This is 500 gigabytes. It's quite old, but up here I have an 8. These are 3s. This is a 4. And as I said, that's a 15. So, you know, over time, you're going to acquire drives of different sizes, but you do need a drive to back up this one. So the concept is that you have your main drive online all the time, and that's what you're using for Lightroom. And then after you've done a major piece of work, a photo shoot for the day, whatever, you make a backup of that onto your secondary so that you're covered. But wait, as they say in TV land, there is more. You need at least one more thing. And that is off-site, you need to keep one more drive. So you need a minimum of 3 drives to play this game. A main one, your primary, a secondary, which you keep plugged into your computer and you're doing daily backups of this, and then one that you take and keep off-site. Now you notice that this one and this one, they're about the same. So after a while, what I can do is leave this one here as my secondary on site and park this one in my safety deposit box or with a neighbor. But the main thing is you just need to get it out of your house and place it in one other location. And that's all part of the, do you feel lucky about the leak in your bathroom above your home office? And that's where that one comes from. So those are the strategies that you need to involve in that. And you don't necessarily need to go out and buy 3 hard drives today. If you've got, you may need to go out and buy one and do this consolidation exercise. And then you may have another one that is big enough that it can hold the backup of this that you can use for now. And then you may be able to use something else for your 3rd level for a little while. And then as this one fills up and starts to become old, then you go and you buy a new one, and then this one relegates to a secondary or an off-site role. So you do have the ability to get value out of these discs as you buy them over time. Now, one other thing that I highly recommend that you do is acquire an uninterruptible power supply. A bunch of companies make this. APC, that's American Power Corporation. They make them. Cyber Power makes them. You can get them at Best Buy, Costco, virtually any electronics store. Amazon, you can buy them on Amazon. Basically what they are is they're a big heavy box with a big battery in them with a bunch of outlets, and you know, you can plug your computer, you plug all your hard drives, you plug your monitor in through this, and it does 2 things. The first thing is it acts like a surge suppressor in the sense that if you get power fluctuations, it filters them out. The second thing that it does is that if you actually do get a power dip, the drives will never see it. Remember, we were talking about the fact that the greatest risk to a hard drive is that when you power it off and back on again. And during power failures, you often bang the power off and on several times, and it's really hard on your main computer, and it's really hard on these disk drives. But if you're running your entire system behind one of these power backup units, then they don't even see the power fluctuation. And I can attest to that because here in mid-Toronto over the last 2 weeks, we have had at least 3 power failures that have occurred like that, where everything in the house is shut down except the computers that have actually been behind the power supply, and they've just, you know, kept on running. These things run anywhere from $50, $60 up to maybe just under 200, and it's purely a question of capacity. You simply need to figure out how much capacity you need and then buy that, plug them in and run them. But this is just a huge investment in effectiveness of not having data loss. Okay, at that stage of the game, I'm just going to slow down for a few seconds. We've talked about storing everything on your main photo drive, going through an inventory exercise to figure out where all your photo assets are spread around, and then copying them all back under a top level file folder called film. And then a little bit later, we'll talk about how we want to get those into Lightroom. But this is the operating model. And if you do this, you will go a long, long way to not losing assets and your files. Okay, everybody can take a break, take a stretch.
Jim, what about NAS drives?
NAS drives are a really good question. We could talk about NAS drives and RAID drives for a long time. My concern about NAS drives is at the consumer level. I've never owned one that I liked, and I have bought them and returned them probably 3 times. What you have to understand about a NAS drive, and NAS stands for Network Attached Storage. It's a box like this that runs off an Ethernet cable like this, which plugs into your router and then is shareable to all of the computers, you know, within your household, and maybe even to the world outside. You can configure it so that it can be your own little cloud. Okay, but I think there are storms afoot with this cloud. I'm sorry, I just thought of that. But the big problem with NASs is these boxes are a collection of hard drives, and there's a computer in that box, usually run by some Linux operating system. And those computers are generally pretty underpowered. I've never found the NAS drives to be very fast. Sure, you can get stuff off them, but I remember one time I actually had to delete 150 files, and this thing was taking, you know, not the seconds it takes, you know, right from a laptop, but multiple minutes to do many of these operations. So the first problem I have with NASs is that the drives themselves are slow. The second is that they're not very fast in terms of uploading data. The best speed you're going to get out of a NAS is the speed of your Ethernet connection in your house. And most people only have gigabit Ethernet connections inside their house. The world is really not opened up to 10 gigabit yet. It's out there, but it's very expensive. But consumer grade computers are sure not running on anything other than gigabit. And what that means is at maximum about 80 megabytes a second data transfer rates. And that's on reading. Writing is much slower. Whereas an attached hard drive right to your system out of the box can easily get 150 to 200. This box up here, it's 600 or 700 because of the way in which it's designed. So it's many times faster than a NAS. If you really have a need to share files, what I would do is I would just plug a directly attached storage into your computer, your Mac or your PC, turn file sharing on, and let people generally access it through your computer. Try that and see if that works rather than the whole NAS thing. I've returned lots of NASs that I bought because I've just simply been unhappy with the performance in Lightroom. But one of the things you have to understand, and it jumps ahead a little bit, the Lightroom catalog cannot run on a NAS drive. Your image files that we talked about under your film folder or your photos folder, yeah, sure, that can be on a NAS drive and that works just fine. But the catalog cannot be stored on a network device. That's just a restriction in the Adobe software. I'm going to talk about that again in a second.
One last point, it could also be used as a backup every night, backing up your photos automatically.
You know, from that point of view, Harvey, I think that's probably a good use for it, because, you know, you can turn on the backup and walk away, and it might take 3-4 times longer than it does on a regular drive. But once we get this thing set up, the speed that your daily backups happen is only measured in minutes anyhow. So if you have a NAS for use for backup, I think that's actually probably a reasonably good use for it.
Okay.
Okay, so now let's talk about the Lightroom catalog. Well, the first thing that we want to get out of the way is these are the picture image folders on your computer. In my perfect world, these are on an external hard drive. They're stored under a folder called Film, which is at the outermost level of that hard drive. And anytime you open that drive up with Finder or Explorer, one click, you can see everything. This is not your Lightroom catalog. What is your Lightroom catalog? It's an entirely separate thing. I happen to have one here in my computer. This is my Lightroom catalog. Looks a bit different, huh? It's smaller. So what is it? The Lightroom catalog, first and foremost, is a group of files that are on your system drive, which we're going to open and play with in a while, and then later we're going to break. And your Lightroom catalog does not contain your images. What does it contain? The Lightroom catalog is a database. It looks like this. This is kind of a spreadsheet representation of it. I mean, you can't read this, but you get the idea that for every image that's on your external hard drive, there is an entry in this big spreadsheet inside Lightroom. One line per photo, all the way down. Now, I don't have very much in this catalog. My main catalog, which is 150,000 images, much bigger than what this clipboard is, but the idea is the same. What's in the database is basically 4 things. The first thing that's in there is what we all call EXIF data, EXIF. That's the data that comes off the camera for exposure, ISO, the lens you use, the serial number of your camera, your common shooting attributes, exposure, ISO, aperture. It's that technical data, which is stored for every photo in the database. The second thing is IPTC. That's also information about the photograph, but it's softer. It's things like your title or your caption. It's things like the model that might have been in that you can record. The location, GPS information is in the IPTC classification of data. So it's kind of like EXIF. It's metadata. It's things about your photo. Those are in there. The third thing that's in there are all the adjustments that you make to your photo. You know, the value of your exposure slider, your contrast slider, all of those are in there. If you've opened up an adjustment brush and, you know, made a mask on your screen and made an area red and then decided to brighten it or sharpen it, that mask is in there and the value associated with that mask is in there. So your adjustments are all in there. The fourth thing that is in the catalog, and it's the most important of all, is the name of the photo on your external hard drive. So your photos are not in Lightroom. What's in Lightroom? You say, well, yeah, there are photos in Lightroom. Yeah, but there's these little itty bitty tiny thumbnails. So if we go and take a look at your picture folder, your picture folder has the raw file. So here they are. These are the raw files from your photo shoot. Depending upon the size of your camera, the raw files coming off my Olympus are about 15 megabytes. Those of you shooting big Sony and Canon and Nikon, you know they're upwards of 40 or 50 megabytes. The image that Lightroom keeps in its database is just a few 100,000 bytes. It's a small JPEG. So why does it do that? Why doesn't it just go back here? Back to the whole issue of performance. Imagine that you have the grid up on Lightroom, and every time you step from a photo, from one to the other, what if Lightroom had to go back to your external hard drive and read 40 megabytes of raw data, think about it, apply all your adjustments, and then spray it on the screen? I think you'd imagine that after a while, that unless you had a supercomputer, that would be a very, very slow process. So the thumbnails that are inside Lightroom, called previews, contain the pre-rendered versions of your files. So whenever you make a change in Lightroom, Lightroom goes and displays the image for you on your screen so you can see it, and then it updates these little tiny thumbnails with that image so that it can simply display them faster. But these are no substitution for your original files. As I said, if your original file that we have stored over here is 15, 20 megabytes, this is only a few 100,000 bytes. So if my entire catalog over here of original image files is 4 terabytes, 6 terabytes, then on my system drive, it's only a few 100 gigabytes. In other words, we're talking that the catalog is orders of magnitude smaller. So this is important. Why? Well, first of all, internal storage inside your computer, these things, hard drives, especially if they're the new SSDs, these things are expensive. I mean, a lot more expensive. And so if you tried to store all of your photo images on an SSD, and you went out to price one and said, well, gee, I need one that's 4 terabytes, you're looking at thousands and thousands of dollars in upgrade costs. And then what happens when it fills? Because it's going to fill. How do you change a 4 terabyte SSD to an 8 terabyte? Well, first of all, I don't know that there are many 8 terabyte SSDs available, but the main thing is that you can't and you won't. You can't buy enough internal storage for your PC or your Mac or your laptop to put all your photo files on an SSD. And your external drive doesn't need to be an SSD either. Here's the thing. When the catalog, when Lightroom is doing operations to its Lightroom catalog, it does hundreds of them a minute. It's constantly reading these little preview files. It's constantly going through the database and updating information. So there's lots of activity going back and forth there. And that needs a super fast hard drive, namely the one inside your computer. And it's good that that doesn't need to be very large because we don't need to buy a ginormous hard drive to go inside your computer. Whereas we do need a ginormous hard drive out here. But it doesn't need to be accessed as frequently, so it doesn't need to be as fast. So it can be slow and cheap. It's even possible for you to open up Lightroom, make a whole pile of adjustments to a bunch of your pictures, and as long as you don't export them or write back to this, you might not have changed anything on your system or on your external hard drive at all. Back to that slide with the guy pulling the rabbit out of the hat. The magic is you make a whole pile of changes and you haven't changed anything at all. But not so with the catalog. So the catalog is not your pictures. I think one of the biggest mistakes that Adobe made with the introduction of Lightroom was the word they coined to tell Lightroom that it was to manage some of your pictures. What's the word they used? They used import. And the problem with import is that it implies that you're putting your pictures somehow into Lightroom. That Lightroom is some 45-gallon oil drum of storage and that all your stuff is in there. When in fact, it's not. It's on an external drive attached to your computer by a wire. It's not in here. So I think import's not a very good word. Here's what I'd like you to think about. Victoria Brampton, who's the Lightroom queen, she has a great website with an awful lot of good help, and I have her references at the end of the package on this. She coined the word. She says that when you import to Lightroom, what you're really doing is registering your images in Lightroom. So Lightroom knows about them, knows a lot about them, it knows everything about them, and it knows where they are, but your images are not stored in Lightroom. So what does that mean? It means that we need to learn how to work with two different things on our computer. This is the easy one, the external hard drive, raw files, JPEG files stored in year folders, all under a top level folder called film, photos, pics, something of that nature. The catalog is just a little bit trickier, but it's not that much more complicated. So at this stage of the game, let's go over to the computer and take a look at the catalog for a few minutes and see exactly what we're dealing with. So I'm just going to change cameras here for a second. Hi, everybody. There, I'm on a different camera now. So what you can see up on your screen is a Finder window on the left. So for people on Windows, the Finder and Windows Explorer are the file managers. They're equivalent in terms of function. They both allow you to look at files and folders, and you can open up folders and drag things around. So they're pretty equivalent. So nothing that I'm doing here on the Mac side is different than the Windows side. Everything that we're working on today is on something called Orange Demo. And Orange Demo has a number of simulated disk drives on it. Just so it doesn't look too mysterious, I have simulated disk drives. I have an old 2005 Seagate. I have a Drive E. Drive E is in fact the drive that all of the images are coming off on my demo catalog. We have an F and a W and an X that we can play around. And the reason I set this up is so that I can go ahead and I can destroy these things, but then I can fairly easily put them back so that I don't throw away the demo that I've carefully built. But the catalog that we're currently running on is a catalog called Demo 2020. And it's currently running in Lightroom. So if I bring Lightroom up and I share Lightroom to you, you will see, okay, there's Lightroom. Okay, so you can see we have on Drive E, I've got, and there's that Seagate drive, and on Drive E, here's my film folder, and I have some year folders and projects and things of that nature. So if we go back to Finder here, and take a look at the catalog is called Demo 2020. That's the folder it's in. The actual catalog is really this file. See, it says demo 2020.lrcat. Now, at this stage of the game, if this is a little bit too small on your screen, what I'd recommend that you do is move that divider bar between my window and the actual computer display window. Make me quite a bit smaller, because I'm not as handsome at this point. And then you'll be able to see this on the screen. The other thing I'd like you to do is note that the catalog is called Demo 2020.lrcat. The LRCat is the file extension. And if you're not seeing file extensions on your computer, whether it's a Mac or a PC, if you've got a notepad with you right now, could you please make a note that later for you, we need to get these turned on so that you see them. You need to see file extensions for your raw files, photo files, Word files, whatever, to be able to easily distinguish files and folders. You need to be able to see these file extensions. Long time ago, file extensions were only ever 3 characters, and that's why so many of them today, file extensions are 3 characters, tells the type of the file. We now have ones that are much longer than that. So the Lightroom Catalog database, the actual real database is a .lrcat file. Okay, and it's called Demo 20. You'll see that it is in a folder called Demo 2020. So that thing there and the folder name are spelled the same. Inside the folder, you'll also see Demo 2020. There's a helper, a previews, and a smart previews, and a couple of lock files. So whenever you see the name of the catalog, it's always spelled the same. And I try to set my catalogs up without spaces in the file name, because once you start to get things like My space Lightroom space catalog, it's very difficult to type that in because there's a real tendency to sometimes put two spaces. And then you can't understand why things are not working because you can't see on the screen that some places you have two spaces and some spaces you only have one. So I try to keep things very simple. Now, for the purposes of this demonstration, I truly am running the catalog off an external hard drive. It's not running off the system drive on my Mac. And the reason for that is it's just because of the way it's being demoed. But I'd just like to show you how it would probably look on your computer if you hadn't made any changes. So as much as I think that Adobe made a mistake calling the whole ingestation or registration process importing and giving the implication that people are actually storing their photos in the Lightroom ecosphere, when in fact they're not. They're merely building previews inside a previews folder. The second thing that I think Lightroom did very wrong is it buries the Lightroom catalog way down in the folder structure on your system drive. So unless you have taken pains to go find it, then you won't see it very easily. So if we were to take a look at a typical Mac, it's here. It starts with users. That's the outer level. Both Mac and PC have their accounts under a folder called users. Then my account is Jim. And then under that, I have a bunch of folders that are important. And you can see music and movies and pictures. Here's pictures. I open that one up. And my goodness, oops, there's Lightroom. And inside Lightroom, there's a Lightroom catalog. And you see it's spelled with a space. And if we open that Lightroom catalog up, and remember, this isn't active. It's just sitting on the hard drive. You can see here's Lightroom catalog.lrcat. And then there's these other things inside its containing folder. Think of that folder as like an envelope. So I'm not recommending that you spend much time fiddling around in this because you don't want to break it. But I would make a recommendation that it's a good idea to move this catalog from where it's buried down in pictures to up where you can see it. And why do I say that? Because frequently you need to check that that catalog is okay. You need to be able to get at it easily to specify it in backup scripts. And if it's buried many levels below, then it's hidden on your hard drive and you don't see it. It also makes it harder to check sizes on it because you have to go digging it out. So if I was going to move this, it's a pretty easy operation. The first thing that I would do is I would make sure that Lightroom is not running. Now, Lightroom is running on this computer right now, but it's actually in the demo catalog. So I can do what I'm about to do without hurting anything. I would simply grab the Lightroom catalog, which is the one that contains all that, and I would grab it. I've selected it, and I'm just going to drag it and put it right in Jim. And then it's promoted up the hierarchy. So now whenever I go into my user account with the other things that are there, like documents and whatever, it's right there and I can see it and I can open it. If you were doing this on a window, now I'm going to put it back. So I just grab it, drag it back. So I realize this is a little bit scary. I'm recommending that you do it. What I recommend that you really do is you take a good look at it. And if you're at all uncomfortable with doing this, then get a hold of me and we'll talk one-on-one and work your way through it so that you can move that catalog to where you can see it and manage it. There's a whole bunch of reasons why I want to see that the catalog is visible to you. And one of the reasons has to do with the number of times that I've had people end up getting into the wrong catalog. The same way that you can have multiple Word documents lying around in a computer, the catalog is just a file. Yes, there are a couple of other things around there with it, like the previews and the smart previews. But at the end of the day, it's just a file. So I'm going to show you something here. I'm going to move this over to one side of the screen, and I'm going to bring Lightroom up, which you can see, and I'm going to make Lightroom only occupy a part of my screen. So this is the demo version of the catalog. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to quit it. Okay, so Lightroom is no longer running. And let's go back to the demo catalog. See, the demo catalog is here, and you notice those two lock files that were there have disappeared. Lightroom creates those lock and audit files when you have the catalog open. So if you actually ever go into a folder and Lightroom is not running and you see those lock folders there, then you know that Lightroom has actually crashed or faulted or stopped running while it was during that catalog. And you may end up with a data integrity problem. But the way I can start Lightroom a couple of different ways. I'm in the Demo 2020 folder, and here is the LRCAT file. If I just double click on this, Lightroom starts with that catalog. It'll take a second to come up. But that's just like every other Word, Excel, Photoshop file. So we spent the whole first half hour saying that Lightroom was unlike any other program, but in this regard, you can start any catalog that you like by double clicking on it. Well, that's one of the dangers that you can run into, because since you can start any LRCAT file and Lightroom will come up, if it's not the one that you've been recently putting your stuff into, then you're in the wrong catalog. So if I was going to move this catalog for real, let's go back. We're just going to shut this down again. I would go back down to the user's account. I would find that Lightroom catalog, and then you move the whole folder, to the upper level. Now we can see it. Then I can start Lightroom by double clicking on it after I've moved it. And now we're actually into a different catalog, which really doesn't have much in it at all. The only reason that I had that there was to just show this catalog movement thing. So I appreciate that you may be a little bit nervous about moving catalogs, but I do believe that it's important that on your main system drive that we get it where you can see it. And as I said, just get in touch with me and we'll work through how you do that. So I'm just going to put it away one more time and then we're going to move on. So the next thing we want to take a look at is setting the backup of the catalog. The catalog itself needs to get backed up. And before we go for our break today, I'm going to show you how we back up your photo files. The catalog itself needs to get backed up, and the way we do that is we specify in Lightroom where that we're going to do a backup and where the backup is going to go. Now, let me just bring Lightroom back up here. So we're going to look at a couple of options inside Lightroom before we move on. Okay, Lightroom's now full screen. So in Lightroom, we have Lightroom Catalog Settings. This is on the Mac. In the PC, the same thing is under File. Catalog Settings. First thing we can see is if we go in here under General, we can see where the catalog that we're currently running is. So you just go to the General and we're running off Orange Demo and we're in the Demo 2020 catalog. And if you click this little thing over here, that will show you in Finder or Explorer exactly where the catalog is on your hard drive. The next thing is we need to look at the preferences, and we want to make sure that when we're starting up Lightroom, which catalog are we getting into? Now, if I go into Lightroom General, Default Catalog, when starting, use this catalog, and there are choices here. You can prompt me, or we can use a specific catalog. My recommendation is not to use the most recent catalog, but to actually, once you have locked down the location of the catalog on your system, make sure that that is the catalog that you are always starting so that you don't accidentally fall in to an old catalog. Typically, what happens is that people mess around with catalogs, or they go in and move something, and then they locate an LR cat on their system and click on it. And because it isn't the one that they have done the most recent import to, it of course doesn't show the images. Or it might even be a completely empty old catalog that you had on your system, in which case the line comes up, Lightroom has lost all my images because you've started up an old empty catalog. So the recommendation is that in this particular case, my demo catalog is actually stored on volume, orange demo, and it's the demo 2020 catalog. So at that stage of the game, I can click on other, and then I can actually navigate to where that catalog is and specify it so that every time I restart Lightroom until I change it again, it'll open up my master catalog. Okay, so we've moved the catalog to the outer folder. We've locked the catalog down. We've talked about starting up Lightroom by double-clicking on an LR file. One other thing that you can do is I'm going to back to Lightroom again. Okay, that normally works, but it does give you a list of catalogs, and then you can determine if you have somehow been in the wrong one or the one that is not the one that you're currently in, and then choose it and click from it. Okay, finally, we want to talk about backing up the catalog. So there's 3 steps to setting the catalog backup options. Step number 1 is we choose how frequently we want to do it. Step number 2, we choose where, and then step number 3, we let it execute on exit. So let's bring up Lightroom one more time. Okay, from the preferences, from Lightroom catalog settings, under general, back up the catalog. You have a choice of every time Lightroom exits, which is the one that I recommend because you can always simply say no, but at least every time you leave exit or you exit Lightroom, it'll remind you. Every time Lightroom exits, that is when you back the catalog up. Then when we actually exit Lightroom and we quit it, do you really want to quit? Yes. It then brings up the dialog that says back up the catalog every time, and then the location where we want to back it up. And we can click choose and navigate to where we want it to go. And by default, it will go on your system drive. But I don't think that is as good a choice as you should make, because if your system drive fails, then you've lost the backup of your catalog. So my recommendation would be to back it up in a folder within your film structure. So the way I would do it is I would click on choose, and then I would go where my principal film folder is, which as we said, we're operating off Drive E. Inside Drive E, I have film, and then I have a folder here called backups. And I would choose that. And then when I exited Lightroom and click back up, it will place a copy of the LRCat file over on the film drive. Finishing up here, we now have talked about the fact that with Lightroom, we have essentially the folder structure, which is the Lightroom Catalog, which is on your system drive. And we have the file images on an external hard drive. So we need two different kinds of backup software to back this up. The first is very easy to deal with. This is the backup software for the Lightroom Catalog. If you're on a Mac, you back it up using Time Machine, which is the backup software built into Mac. It comes free as part of the operating system. And as long as Lightroom is not running, then whenever Time Machine runs, you get a completely clean backup of everything to do with your Lightroom catalog and all the settings within it. I don't have a stronger recommendation on the Windows side, but there are 3 different pieces of software that you can look at for backing up your system. And you may already be using a piece of software to do it, in which case that backup should catch Lightroom when it's running. But if you don't have anything for backing up your system, my top recommendation would be to get a Chronos True Image, which is about $50 US. That'll back up your entire Windows system, similar as Time Machine backs up an entire Mac system. And then with the Acronix system, you can actually reinstall from those backups. It's a bit more difficult than on the Mac, but it is at least the piece of software you need. Some people within the club are using Ease US Win Backup. It's free. It has a different set of tools, but again, you can make a complete image backup of your system, including your catalog, and do that. And then the other thing is from a company called Retrospect Solo. It's a bit more expensive. It's $40 a year, and that's an ongoing subscription. Okay, to do the image files, which is your folder structure on your external hard drive, we have 2 options. On the Mac, we have a program called ChronoSync, which is available for about $25 from the US App Store. That's highly recommended. Today, I'm going to show that to you, but you also have the free option, which is Free File Sync. And Free File Sync is kind of fun because the same piece of software runs on both Windows and Mac. So I have been using the Mac version of Free File Sync for quite a while over the last month to be doing backups of these demos and backups of the film structure on my drive, and it seems to be running just fine. Both of these, I think, are solid, stable pieces of software, and both recommended. So what we're going to do is I really want to show you how this process works, because it's so important to back up these external drives. And so that I can guarantee that the process works, I have pre-recorded the demo on this, so it's fairly clean. So what I'm going to do, since I'm running just a little longer than I'd like, is I'd like to take a break now for about 5 minutes or so. We'll get a fresh bottle of water, and then when you come back, what we'll do is we'll take a look at the video about how to actually back up your image structure on your external hard drive using both ChronoSync and Free File Sync, and we'll run through it.
Jim, it's Barry. I have a quick question.
Sure.
With regards to the Lightroom catalog, my name is just the default from way back, Lightroom 2, I think, or something. But if I want to change it to the master, so I know I'm always using the right one, is it difficult to rename it and then point Lightroom to that catalog?
No, it's absolutely easy. All you have to do is go and find it on your hard drive, and then where it says, what did you say it said, Lightroom 2?
Yeah, I think I have it as Lightroom 2 something, and then, you know, all the extensions.
Yep, all you have to do is just, and you're on a Mac, right?
Yes, I'm on a Mac now.
Yep, right click on it and do rename, and then just type in the new name carefully. And I've actually got specific slides coming up to show how to do that. You just make sure you spell the catalog and the previews and the smart previews all exactly the same, and then make sure you spell the containing folder exactly the same. Double click on it to start it, and you'll see it'll all come up just fine.
So you have to rename each extension, not the extension, but the name before it, exactly the same.
You have to name each one exactly the same.
Jim, have you ever used Carbon Copy or heard of that from the Mac?
I haven't used Carbon Copy for the Mac, but if it does pretty much the same thing, it allows you to do folder synchronization, then it could be viable as well. Is that what you're using, Harvey?
Yeah, that's what I'm using. It
Okay.
also checks the integrity and makes sure that if things aren't backed up, it gives you a report and everything. It's
Okay, so
pretty fulsome.
when we run the video, you'll see how we do it with Free File Sync and ChronoSync, and you can look at that and say, yep, I'm covered.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Jim, what's the, is there a performance difference between these various backups like ChronoSync versus Free File Sync?
Well, the first time you're going to do the backup, John, if you're taking your entire image structure and copying it, you know, it's going to take a long time. I mean, it might take days, weeks, not weeks. It might take hours and days to do it, right? And you're going to do the first copy by just dragging it with the operating system. And that's going to be absolutely limited by the speed of your hard drives. When you do it the next time, when you're using the synchronization software, it's simply in the order of minutes. So there may be a slight difference, but we're not talking on your daily backups hours. We're talking whether it might be a minute or two. So I don't think there's a meaningful difference, even on really, really large copies between the two pieces of software.
Okay.
In other words, I would use them. You don't use both of them. You'd use one or the other. And it'd be interesting to see, you know, what Harvey says about Carbon Copy. But my guess is that when you're doing your daily backups, you know, unless you have a lot of changes that you've made, you've downloaded chips and chips, you know, full of new stuff, then it might take a fraction longer. But it really, I think it's all the same once you get the system up and running.
Okay, thanks.
You also run them in the middle of the night, set it up to run after midnight, so you don't care how long it takes unless you're a night bird.
Well, you know, you'll see in the video on this as I'm doing it. I mean, the subsequent runs, Harvey, even on my catalog of an external storage of, you know, 150,000, only take a few minutes to do. And there's always an option for me to do a trial first with both of these pieces of software, where it then splashes up and tells me what it's going to do. And I never let it run until I have looked at that trial, just to be certain that it's not going to obliterate my backup. For example, if I had accidentally deleted a whole year folder, you know, because of some stupid keyboarding mistake, from my primary drive, and if I just let the backup run free, then it would replicate that deletion on the receiving drive. And if I was just letting it run at night without looking at it, I might not be aware of that. But whenever I run it, I make a point of always saying, yes, that makes sense. I mean, not without looking at it in terrible minutiae detail, but if I was about to lose, you know, all of 2008 because I had done something stupid, then I would see, just a second, why is it deleting all of 2008 on my mirror drive? And I would just simply stop at that point and go hunting for what the heck had gone wrong. So I don't actually let it run until I've just taken a look at it.
Yeah, in my office, I use something called ThinkBack Pro, which also warns me ahead of time what's going to happen. But it also has a way of recovering if you do make a mistake.
Well, sure, and that would also exist with this too, but I think you want to get to the point where you don't want to create a real problem where you're going to have to be re-putting everything back piecemeal because your backup, you know, did something horrible. So I'd be being very careful about it. But yeah, I agree. I mean, a failsafe exists even with Free File Sync and ChronoSync as well. But man, you're really kind of hoping that those things don't happen.
Of course, but they will.
Well, that's why you got to be aware of it. And then at least if it does, you might have a clue about how to, you know, dig yourself out of it. for the next about 12 minutes or so, we're going to just take a fairly clear demonstration of how we set up and copy the entire the entire folder of images. The test case that I have right here is only about 12 gigabytes, and the reason I did it in video is I could speed it up so we didn't have to wait around for things to happen. Even when I run these applications on my real film folder, after this process has been going, it's still only in the order of minutes. So it's a fairly fast process. The technique is we have to make a copy of the entire drive the first time, and that takes whatever it takes. And then we use the synchronization software in order to take and manage it every day after that. And it does a really good job, and it's really fast. So I'm going to let the video run, and it'll work for me for the next 12 minutes.
That was really good, Jim. I've been using ChronoSync for a few years, but you showed me some new features which I haven't been using, which will be helpful.
Jim,
Yeah.
do you have a preference of ChronoSync versus Free File Sync?
Well, Free File Sync is free, and free means not as fully featured. So I think you can get your feet wet with Free File Sync, and it's easy to use. It's a good tool, but seriously, when I'm dealing with RAID drives and all my big thing, I've spent the big $40 and bought ChronoSync. And I know that those guys are doing enterprise systems and whatever. So, you know, down the road, my recommendation on the Mac side would be do ChronoSync if you can.
Yeah, I kind of like the dual panel view of Free File Sync. You know, where it shows deletions and additions.
Yeah, well, you get that after Trial Sync and ChronoSync as well.
You can set it up the same way?
Oh wait, no, I see what you mean about the dual panels. Yeah, no, you don't get the dual panels in ChronoSync, I don't think.
Okay, thanks.
Now, Paul Naish, if you're still here, Paul, you had talked about trying to set up a system of backups where you were trying to auto detect it and put it into the cloud. One of the things that I have done for a while is you can do date selections much better in ChronoSync, but you can also do it in Free File Sync. But you could say something like, from the left panel, I only want you to pay attention to changes made since, say, December the 1st of 2019. And then instead of your destination being a mirror drive, another external hard drive, it could actually be a folder on Google Drive, iCloud Drive, Dropbox, something like that. And then what it would do is every time you ran it, it would pick up all the changes from your big source of 150,000 drives and drop just the changes on the cloud system. And so the cloud system wouldn't contain all 150,000 of your target images from, you know, your folder structure, for example, in my case, just changes you've made since November, but as a backup of last resort and one that's guaranteed to be off-site and on somebody else's file server, if you did have to rebuild from it as a backup of last resort, your entire changed file structure would be on the target drive. So that's definitely worth playing around with it. And I've done it for the last couple of years using Dropbox. So if you want to talk more about that offline, I'd be happy to go into that as well. But that's another thing you can do.
Any cloud systems you recommend, or is just Dropbox?
Well, I mean, a cloud system, I guess I thought I was going to mention this at the beginning. For people like us with, you know, upwards of terabytes of data, or even, you know, lots of hundreds of gigabytes, cloud systems for everything that we do are too expensive, too slow. So, you know, we're not there. We need to work with hard drives. But in terms of cloud systems, I played with iCloud Drive and it works fine. I've used Dropbox for a number of years, but recently I was playing around with Google Drive. And the one thing that did impress me was that I was able to get the full upload speed of my interconnection here at the house to run on Google. I have 300 megabits up and 300 megabits down, and so that translates to about 30 million bytes per second up and down. With Google Drive, when I do a transfer to it, I'm getting all 30 million bytes per second. With Dropbox, it's 5 or 6. iCloud Drive is sometimes 2, 3, occasionally peaks at 8. But I think Google Drive has actually got some promise. Now, I've only got 15 free gigabytes on that. So that's not even one SD card, you know, for a photo shoot. So I'd have to take a look at the pricing on it. But I was impressed with their server speed.
I think Prime Video, if you're a Prime member on Amazon, gives you unlimited space.
Thank you. I need to check that. What a useful thing. Providing, I guess, that it takes all kinds of files. The other thing about, you got to be careful about that is one of them only works with certain kinds of photo files, and we need to be able to work with TIFFs, PSDs, PNGs. We need to be able to work with the whole range without restriction.
Sure. All right.
But that's a good one, Harvey. I need to look at that. That's a good point.
Yeah, I'll check that out too. Thanks.
Okay. Alrighty, any other questions on backup? Now, all the videos that we're going to do today, plus the PowerPoint and everything, I'm going to be sharing up with you after we're done. So you'll be able to have a copy of that video if you want to go back and check notes in it and so forth.
So I have a question as to how many backups, old backups, and old catalogs should I be saving on my hard drive?
You mean from the catalog backup?
Well, both. I have old catalogs and I have backups. You know, if I do a backup once a week, I've got like, you know, maybe 20 of them. How many of those do I need to save?
I think that's a good question. First of all, if you are really comfortable that your most recent backup is pristine and okay, and you're not missing any files or you haven't done anything bad, then the first thing that I would say is you can then start to get rid of those old backups as soon as you have confidence that your one backup is good. Because, you know, every time you fall into an old backup and you begin to go after the files in it, then you don't have anything that you've done, you know, forward of that. So old backups can be a bit dangerous. So I would say that as soon as you're absolutely confident that you have proper backups of everything and that the last backup, then I would get rid of the others. The only thing you might do is keep one that is 6 months old and a year old as just something that you might have in the event that you had a complete disaster. But I can't see you needing to go back to a year-old Lightroom catalog or even wanting to, unless there was some particular thing you wanted to look at in it. But then you've got to make sure that when you go into that backup, you then get back into your correct production catalog, Lance, after you've been in the backup.
Jim, what does Time Machine backup?
Time Machine is for Mac only. It backs up only your system drive, your Macintosh HD, and it backs up absolutely everything on it. And it's the best thing since Pink Cake. It is an absolutely awesome piece of software that will save your tail on Macs over and over and over again. So if you're not running it, talk to me offline. We'll get you set up on it and do it. It's easy peasy to run, and it is absolutely amazing.
Hey, Jim, it's Barry. Oh, sorry, Paul.
Yeah.
Okay.
Regarding the catalogs, say you have your master catalog, but maybe you have an older one that you're using something on, or you need something. Can you merge catalogs, or should you merge them, or that's not good?
No, I think as part of that whole inventory process that I talked about, you can certainly go and merge catalogs. And if you go into the file, let me just bring up Lightroom here, and I'll just show you where it is. Okay, I'm in my my demo catalog, just to be sure here. So I'm in my demo catalog, right? If you go to File, the file menu starts with new catalog. Open the catalog by navigating to it on your hard disk and opening it. Open recent shows you recent catalogs that you've been into. There's import. Here's import from another catalog. So if you have that other catalog and all of its images up on a hard drive plugged into your computer, you can click on import from another catalog, and then you navigate over and you open that catalog up, and Lightroom spins around, and eventually it will give you a report of everything that's in that catalog, and then you can import all of it. You can cherry pick bits and pieces of it, and you can control whether you bring in the raw images or just the edits. You've got a lot of control over how you finally do it. But that act of merging is pretty straightforward if you don't have any conflicts. As long as that old catalog is, I don't know, let's pick a number. It's everything from 2005, and my current catalog has nothing from 2005. The process is really easy peasy. Where it gets more complicated is if the catalog that you're importing from is almost the same as your current catalog, because maybe it's a backup or you've had some kind of disaster, and you're literally faced with weaving together two things that are almost the same. You know, your mileage is going to vary depending upon how complex that appears. If it's just a few folders and just a few shoots, it's really easy to do. But if there are a lot of changes peppered over the other catalog that you have to consider very carefully, it's a bit more of a tedious process. But in a lot of cases, you can do it really easily.
Yeah. What about the Lightroom data that's stored, at least in Windows? It's in app data under user. So there is some stuff in there like Lightroom plugins and things like that. It's something I just recently found out about from the Lightroom Queen. So I'm backing that up independently of the catalog.
Yeah, for sure. That's the kind of thing that, for example, if you're running something like Acronis and you're backing up your whole C drive, Acronis is doing you know, backups kind of similar to Time Machine in the sense that it's picking up all the changes that you're making on an hourly or ongoing basis. It'll catch that kind of stuff. And then when you do a full system recovery, it will roll it all back in and put it all back where it was before.
No, I'm talking about just there's a Lightroom folder that has some stuff like plugin information in that. It's not stored in the Lightroom catalog or the Lightroom directory. It's stored in this app data Lightroom folder under user.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. I think that's why the safest way is to use something like Acronis to capture it all, so that all of the outgoing stuff essentially does get eventually gathered together in your output destination backup, so that if you have to recover it, it all comes back. I mean, otherwise what you're saying, and I appreciate it, is you've got to run around piecemeal on your hard drive and find all these little things that may be scurried around that are not quite the catalog and so forth, and try to back them up independently. And my guess is that if you do that, you'll miss something. So that's why you want to use on the system drive where the catalog is, either Time Machine or something like Acronis that is always guaranteed of capturing it all for you.
Okay.
And running it every day. Like, I mean, Time Machine for me runs in the background, and unless I turn it off because I just want to have it off for a while, it's running continuously in the background. And when I used to run Acronis, it also would run continuously in the background. So, and I will tell you that one day in February of this year, I did have a very strange thing that had happened on my Mac. All of a sudden, it slowed down to an absolute crawl. I mean, it was just a complete disaster. And I did all kinds of stuff for, 3 or 4 hours to try and figure it out, and including system resets and whatever. And I finally came to the conclusion that what had happened is that I got a pile of really bad sectors on my solid state drive, and I was in trouble on that. And so it turned out that I wiped the entire hard drive. The time machine that I had been running was up to literally minutes before this phenomena occurred. And while it was, being backed up to a fairly slow USB 2 device, I was able to put it back in and say, recover it all. I went to sleep that night. It was Saturday, and by Sunday morning, my machine had been rolled back to exactly to where I was about 10 minutes before this, brutality occurred. And I know Acronis can do exactly the same thing. And I think that's really the only safe way to capture all of these things that are pepper and salted all over your hard drive. Okay, well, let's go and break some things now, because that's a lot of fun. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to split Lightroom's screen down here a little bit. You know what you're looking at, so you would never work this way, but I want to put up a Finder window right beside me here. And this is another opportunity when you may want to try and make the screen share look as big as possible on your monitor so that you can see this. It'll be a little clearer on the video. But in the Finder window here, I'm going to actually go over to the film drive that we've been playing with. So that is this pretend drive E, which has film in it. So what you're seeing here, film and all of this stuff here, is exactly the same as over here. Now, you know that when we, and it really should all match, even though I've been doing deletions, all the stuff where we were making deletions during the video have all been recovered and back. So everything that's in film here should be over here. But let's actually go through, and we're going to go and through a bit of a structure on this to break it and fix it. But we're going to start here with this first thing, and that is that in Library, the Library folder subpanel on the left, and by that I mean this area here on your screen where you have the drive. Once you get to the point where you have, your external hard drive or whatever built properly with film, your going forward decision is that you should never mess with it directly on Finder or Windows Explorer to move things around, add or delete things unless you're really comfortable doing it. If we do all of the operations that we want to do inside Lightroom, then you're going to see that as I make some changes here, in real time, the operating system is picking them up out here. But if I make changes, and we're going to do this and we're going to break it, to the film folder outside of Lightroom, Lightroom doesn't see the changes, and that results in, broken links in Lightroom and missing files and so forth. So in the folder panel, your friend is left click. If you select any folder with a left click and then right click on your mouse, you're going to see that you have a whole bunch of options here. And everything that you ever could do to create or delete, name, move, or whatever, you can do either with this panel or by just simply dragging and dropping within Lightroom. So what do I mean for that? Okay, let's start with the first thing, which is really easy to do. Let's just go to 2008 here. You can see I've got Sand Dunes and Niagara Institute, okay? So if I select Sand Dunes, you see we have rename. So I can rename Sand Dunes to Sand Dunes, I gotta spell it right, M-I-B-I-A, okay? When I click Save, and it's changed in Lightroom, and if you look over in the Finder panel, you can see that Lightroom has changed it over here as well. So everything's good. Well, what happens if I do the reverse? If I change it in the operating system, if I go here and I change Namibia and I just put some X's after it, hit enter, Lightroom will eventually catch up to the fact that it's not there. And if you take a look, all of a sudden, all of the little badges have exclamation marks on it. And if you click on that, it's saying, I've lost the link to the file. You know, when we were talking about registration and import, and we were talking about the clipboard that pretended like a spreadsheet, we said what Lightroom records is the location on your external hard drive of where every file is. But if you go to your external hard drive and you break it or change it, then Lightroom doesn't know. The other thing, and I don't know whether or not you can see it clearly on your screen, just by my mouse pointer here, if you look at that closely and on a real monitor, you would see it larger. There's a question mark there. And the question mark is telling you, for the sake of the entire folder, I don't know where it's gone. So there's two ways to fix it. Well, we could go back to Finder, and I could just respell it correctly. So I could go here and just hit take the X's out of it and go back and undo the bad thing that I did. And then if we just give it a second in Lightroom, sure enough, Lightroom's fixed it all. You see how fast it did it? But the other way we can do it, let's just go back and break it again. Namibia desert. So we've now renamed it in the operating system, and then over here, we can see we have the question mark again, and all the images are missing. Well, if it was only one or two images that were missing, we can click on the exclamation mark and click locate and fix them one or two at a time. But we know it's the entire folder that's missing. So if I right click on it,
bought a 12 gigabyte terabyte hard drive because my 6 terabytes full. Can I just transfer everything over to the 12 and name it the same number as the, or sorry, letter as the 6? And will that full Lightroom, or do I have to do what Jim is doing?
You just copy the files over. You don't have to rename the hard drive. I mean, you can rename the hard drive after, but you can't have two hard drives with the same drive letter.
No, but afterwards. After I copy everything over, I'm going to then change the old drive to drive Z, and the new drive will be drive E, which was the previous letter.
Yeah, but the easiest thing in Lightroom, all you have to do is go to, like you see here on the screen where it says drive E.
Yeah.
And you disconnect drive E, and now all your files are showing with question marks, right?
Right.
You just right click on drive E, say locate drive, go to your new drive, whatever,
yeah.
F, and select it, select the parent one, and you'll be hooked up again. It'll be synchronized with your Lightroom catalog again.
Okay, great, thanks.
So let's actually do that, because that is actually the very next thing. So
sorry about that.
No, that's okay. Jenny was trying to do cookies, and somehow we ended up with a problem in the oven, and the fire alarm, and the house went on, and anyhow, we're all fine.
Yeah, but are the cookies burnt?
Sadly, I don't think she got them in the oven, so I think all we have is dough.
Oh.
I think we'll have to barbecue them later. But okay, Harvey, so here's what you do. So here we have drive E, and here on drive E is the top level, folder film, right? Okay, so over here, under the simulated drives, here I have drive E, and here I have drive F, okay? So all we would need to do, for example, if we had lost our drive E, I can simulate that by just changing drive E, put an X there, and then what's going to happen over here is it's going to find that all of drive E is gone missing. There you go. You see film is missing and everything here?
Yeah.
So all I need to do is say, well, where's drive E? Right click, find the missing folder. So this is the equivalent of plugging the drive back in. choose drive F. And it will
You
fix.
wanted EX, not F.
No, drive E was how I disconnected my drive E. I just
Oh, I
renamed
see.
it drive EX.
Yeah, right. Okay, great. So that'll be simple.
It's pretty simple, and you see how fast it happened. Now, I mean, I did that on a drive with like what 950 pictures on it, but it's about as fast on a big drive with hundreds of thousands of images. And so here's the really big takeaway from this is that if you have a drive with one top level folder with all of your stuff on it, and these are all of your digital assets, and it dies and you've got a backup, well, you're back in business by just plugging the drive in and clicking on it and saying, find the missing folder, providing you have a recent backup on it. Now, if the backup is out of date by a few days, well, you're going to end up with some piecemeal work to maybe put it back together. But the vast majority of it is taken care of within just a few seconds for switching that.
Yeah, thanks.
So, okay, so the two things that are in here is when something goes missing, it shows up as find missing folder. So that's what happened with E, is that it was find the missing folder. If you simply want to move from one thing to the other, it's update folder location. So let me click on film, and you see down here I have update folder location. It doesn't say find missing folder anymore, it's update the folder location. So if I click on that, I can go back over to Orange Demo. I can go to my simulated drives, go down to drive EX, okay? Now I put it back online, and film is in there, and I can now say film is coming from drive EX. And you see it's all changed already. And you see where F is still kind of in there, but there's nothing on it. The whole structure has moved that fast back and forth. Is that clear? Okay.
Can you delete the drive F just to clean up the?
Sure. So I can right click on it, and so if you can create something, if you can create something, you can remove it. If you can name it, you can rename it. The symmetry is there. So if I just go remove, it's gone.
Thanks.
Okay, but let's take a look at something here that's a little bit different from moving files around. Let's just see what happens. If I actually want to get rid of an entire folder, for example, like this new dogs folder, it's only got 2 images in it. If I right click on it and remove, look at what the dialog says. The dialog says remove the folder, but the images are going to stay on disk. So it actually leaves the images behind like breadcrumbs. Well, you might not want to do that if you're really trying to get rid of the whole folder. So in which case I would have to select all of the images in the folder manually. So I click the first one. Let's do it with something that's got a little bit more to do. We'll do it this one here. This has got 36 in it. So I would go Command A or Control A on a PC, select all of them. If you look down here, it says 36 selected. I then press the delete key, and it says, do you want to remove them from the catalog or delete them from disk? I want to delete them from the disk. So at that point, they're now gone. And then I can remove the folder, and all vestiges of it are lost. Okay. So other things that we can do here, go to the sand dunes here. Well, actually, take a look at this. Here's this old Seagate drive, okay? Seagate drive has got some stuff on it from 2005. And I don't have that under my film folder. All I want to do is just drag that over. So I can just go to 2005, of which there's 31 images between these 2 folders. And I can just drag 2005 from the Seagate into the film. And it still leaves the Seagate around, but then you can see that the whole thing moves. So you can certainly move whole folders from one drive to the other or from one folder to another, whether it's on a drive or whether it's a folder, doesn't really matter to Lightroom. That operation you can do. If I want to take and just, just for the heck of it, take a bunch of images within a folder, I just selected, 6 of them here from the one on the top left here. And if you grab in the middle, don't grab from the badge down here. That doesn't work. You have to grab from the middle. It's a subtle point. I can take and just drag and move images around inside. Then they move from folder to folder. So if you want to delete an image, it's right click and you have remove photo, and Lightroom asks whether you want to delete it from disk or you want to remove it from the catalog. Well, I mean, I never really want to remove them just from the catalog and then leave them lying around on the hard drive. I mean, if I'm deleting the image, it's gone. So delete. So you can delete from within a folder. You can drag to move from one folder to another. You can move an entire folder by just selecting the folder. And I'm going to move this 2020. I'm going to move this thing here down to 2007. And if you watch it, if there's an awful lot of them to move, you can see it decreasing the count and increasing the count as it moves it. So that opens up actually another discussion point, that little manipulations like this around inside your catalog are really fast and they're really easy to do. But for example, if I wanted to move, for example, this entire 2014, which is 329 images, if I actually wanted to move that someplace, it might be better to do that outside of Lightroom. So the exercise is that I'm actually going to take this entire 2014 and I'm going to move it to my projects folder. And if we just do it by dragging it, it's actually going to take a little bit of time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cheat, and I'm going to do it at the operating system level. So let's go over here to our drive E, and what are we currently? I think we said we're back on EX now, simulated drive. We're on drive EX. So 2014, and we're going to move it all to projects. So as I said, if I just grabbed all 329 of them and dragged them into projects, it would do it one picture at a time and you would see it counting down and counting up. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to go over to the operating system, whether or not this is Finder or whether or not this is Explorer, and I'm going to grab the 2014 and I'm going to put it into projects. And it's done, okay? Because the operating system can move it so much faster than Lightroom can. And now 2014 shows up with question marks. Well, we know where it is. We moved it to projects. So I right click, find the missing folder. And there it is inside projects. Choose it. And it's now fixed up the new location, and there they are. So that was a pretty easy example, and you can follow that again in the video when we get it back. But if you're actually making consolidations from one drive to another, because you're consolidating some old drives that you've got lying around in your drawer, my recommendation would be, in fact, to exactly do it at the operating system by simply copying the contents from the old drive into whatever your top level film structure is, and then fixing it in Lightroom with the right click. And the reason why I'm saying that is twofold. First of all, it's a copy and not a move. Whenever Lightroom does it inside the folder panel, it's actually moving the files one at a time as you go. And if something were to go wrong, you would end up with a partial situation. Some of the files have been moved and some wouldn't. And you'd then have to go in and go through some tedious exercise of trying to figure out what the heck happened and then finish it off. But if you do it at the operating system level, it's much faster. And because you're going to do a copy, you're always leaving the images behind on the source. And then all you have to do when you get it over here is right click and update the folder location and or find the missing folder, and it's much faster. So if that's not clear, it will be in the notes, but that's a case where when you're doing really, really big movements that in fact you do want to do it from the operating system level and then just fix up the references here with the right click, find the missing folder or update the folder location over in the catalog. Okay, so the next things that we can do, anytime you're looking at a folder, remember you can always select it and right click and get info, which will give you information about counts and sizes. So this has popped up and this has told me that this particular folder, 2009, had 103 gigabytes on it. And I can see where it is. If I right click show in Finder or show in Windows Explorer, would be on the PC side, it'll pop up another window. Okay. We've found missing folders, we've updated folder locations, we've renamed, we've removed, we have moved, okay? So as I said, the symmetry is that if you can create something, you can delete something. If you can name it, you can rename it. So all of those operations are available here, and we've seen, you know, what happens with the Finder window on the left, and we've seen a couple of ways to fix it. All right, let's move down to one that I don't believe you've seen before. And what we're going to do is we're going to do import a new way, recognizing what's going on here. So I'm going to go to Film, and from my camera today, I shot a few images. So I'm going to pull the chip, and I'm going to insert the chip into my card reader. And this is going to be in 2020. So I've already got a 2020 folder. If I right click on that, I can create a folder inside 2020. So I'm going to create a folder 2020. And today is 05, May 24, Terra shoot. Create. And you can see it's created a folder, and if you look over on our hard drive, we now have, well, I didn't spell it correctly, we can now see that we've created a folder called Terra Shoot right on our hard drive. The next thing I can do is I can select that with a left click, right click, and look what's here. Import to this folder. And where did that come from? Well, it's actually been there forever, but you just may never have seen it before. But if I select import to this folder, then the import dialog opens up. We are all set up to put this directly in. So all I have to do at this stage of the game is click import. And you can see if we look at the 2020 folder, here are the images coming in off the hard drive, right here, and they're being created right in place within our folder structure. So let's just go through that again. we'll delete all of it. So I go Command A, right click, move photos, delete, and remove the folder. Okay, so the process is select the parent folder, create a folder inside, 2020 sub 05 May 24, Terra. Create. It's empty. Now you notice that we have the import down here. We don't use import down here. We select the folder, right click, import to this folder. It opens up, finds the memory card, and then all we have to do, I don't know why this box is popping up, but it's not important. Over here, we can check the preview size we want, whether or not we want to have minimal or whether or not we want to have standard previews. Over here, we should make sure that into subfolder is not checked and organized. Instead of being by original folder's date, we just select in one folder. So we check those two things and then we just click import and everything flows right through to our hard drive and is in our folder structure right here. And it's taking a little bit longer because we're generating the longer previews.
Why don't you use the import button?
Because this is at least an order of magnitude faster and easier, and you don't have to mess around with the right-hand side of the import dialog box and put it in a place where you didn't expect it. You created the folder right on your hard drive by doing that create, and then you import it directly to it, and it's all done. Then if we go Lightroom Classic and we go Quit, we can then back up the catalog.
That's because you're taking it off a card, a memory card. But if
Yeah.
so, what I do is I go for memory card. I set up a folder in with the name, and then I import it into Lightroom. So it's the same thing, just done differently.
Yeah, and there's lots of ways you can import into Lightroom. I'm going to leave you with a link to another video that shows a whole pile of different ways you can import into Lightroom. You can drag and drop into Lightroom. You can basically do what I just did by creating a folder and import to it. That opens a big black box in the middle of the screen. You can drag into it. So I've actually got another whole video there that runs for a few minutes that goes through a whole bunch of different ways that you can get stuff into Lightroom without just doing the memory card thing. Having done this, if we then go down to our Drive F where we created our file synchronization, we've now done the backup. We double click on the file synchronization and there's the compare. It does it for us when we're done. We now synchronize and done, and we've actually backed up our photo sheet. Bingo. So then Drive E and Drive F are the same again, and we've done the backup of the catalog, and we've done the backup of the E to the F, and we're pretty much done. So that gets me to the main end of the whole thing this afternoon, and we're almost at 4 o'clock. If there are questions and so forth that deal with some other specific areas, I've got some slides on some things that might come up. But otherwise, that pretty much takes us from the beginning to the end. So we've gone through and talked about how the catalog structure is so very different from your actual image structure and how having them on different hard drives can protect you and why those hard drives have to be different. How you can make copies and backups of those things, and how when things go wrong, you can actually go in and fix it with renaming and using the features in the actual catalog for finding things that are broken. Barry had a great question on combining catalogs. My recommendation is if you want to try that, that's a really easy thing to do. You could simply go into Lightroom, create a new catalog, put one photo sheet into it, and then go back into your main one and practice importing from it. It's a really straightforward thing to do. And it's a good exercise to reinforce as well that you have a catalog on your main system and you have a photo shoot someplace else so that you can practice combining the files. So that's where we got to at this point. So if there's any other questions, let's open it up for that. And then if anybody wants to do a breakout at the end because they've got some particular things, we can talk about that later. And as I said, I'm available to talk with anybody, or screen share or whatever. If you've got some particular questions or you're just unsure about a couple of areas, can definitely help work through those things.
It's been an excellent session, Jim. I know I've learned a number of things.
Jim, I have a couple questions.
Is that John? Yes.
Is it still preferable to try to keep it, if we don't have, millions of photos, is it still preferable to always try to stay with one catalog?
Yeah, that question comes up. And I think from a technical standpoint, Adobe is pretty clear that for the vast majority of people, one catalog is perfectly fine. There's really no performance implications on modern hardware for catalogs of even 1 million images. And because you have, and if you've got 1 million images, then chances are you're going to have a big catalog. It needs to be on a fast solid state drive on your system and so forth. And so splitting the catalog up isn't necessary from a performance point of view. So from an organizational point of view, they do say, well, for example, if you were maybe a real estate person or a wedding photographer, and you were doing, lots and lots of wedding shoots, like a wedding shoot could be 4,000 images. And once you finished with Mary Jane and next week you're dealing with Paula Sue and the week after, you could kind of make a case because you're never really sharing any information between those catalogs, or you really don't need to see Paula Sue and Mary Jane or whatever all together at once, that you could segregate those into different catalogs, and maybe even they could be backed up separately and put in a vault someplace if you were doing that commercially. I think you could kind of make a case for that. Work material and home material, they might make a case that you might want to split for that because you wouldn't want to combine those. But I think for photographers like us that are, travel and, project related and doing the kind of things that we do, one catalog is absolutely going to be just fine. And then you have all the advantages that you can search across all your folders. If you want to put all your pictures of cardinals in a cardinal collection, you can. And Blue Jays can be in a Blue Jay collection, and marmots can be in a marmot collection, even though they're spread all over your hard drive. You get to do that. Remember, if you have photos in separate catalogs, Lightroom can't search across closed catalogs, even if they're on the same system drive. You can only have one catalog open at once, and Lightroom is totally focused on only drilling down through that one catalog. So if you want to be able to have wide-ranging search, then they really all need to be stored under one top-level folder name within one very, very large catalog.
And for the preview size, what size do you recommend?
Well, once you start to develop, you're going to be generating one-to-one previews behind the scenes anyhow. So when you import, if you think that you're going to be immediately developing, what you might do is import and choose one-to-one previews. They take longer to generate, sometimes quite a lot longer to generate, but you could go off and have a coffee, have lunch, have dinner, let the previews generate, and then you come back, and then your stepping experience whenever you go in and out of develop would be faster. But if you're just going to download the photo shoot and put it away, then you could just use standard and that'd be fine. Previews, one-to-one previews, which are quite a bit larger, take quite a bit more space. Lightroom cleans them up and gets rid of them for you after 30 days of not touching them anyhow. So that process is all pretty automatic. What my practice is that if I'm going to work on the photo shoot right after I come back in, I generate one-to-one, walk away from the computer while it takes 10, 15, 20 minutes to do it, and then I come back after it's done.
And a final question on disks. If most of your drives that you're doing backups to are going to be offline, you're going to do the backup and then do an eject and then cycle them around. Will they last longer if they're not spinning over time, or does that not matter?
I think the biggest risk is that when you power them back on, that's when they can often fail. So, every time you bring one back online, you need to kind of give a little prayer saying, good, that kind of worked. But I think you can certainly stick them in a drawer for a long time and you might get lucky and they'll be perfectly fine. By and large, if you leave the drive up and it's powered on and it's running, the computers in the drive, the firmware in the drive is constantly evaluating, at least modern drives. If you're talking about hard drives that are 10 or 15 years old, it may not have the logic in them, but new modern drives are running firmware inside them, that's constantly checking, the drive anyhow. And if they're finding bad sectors in the drive, even while you've got it powered on, it's remapping it and, giving you reports and beginning to warn you if the drive is beginning to fail. And I think that's all really valid and good, which is one of the reasons why I say, by and large, you want to put all your assets in one basket, keep it online, keep it on all the time, be backing it up every day, and then at least you know what's going on. You're finding things out. But if you turn the drive off and then the drive begins to fail, while it's offline, then you're not going to know until you power it on, and then it could be too late.
So you keep all the drives online except for the one that's off-site?
That's pretty much what I do. If I find they're getting a little bit warm, I might, cycle them down, a little while and give and take. But by and large, I keep them online and I keep them spinning.
Okay.
Now,
Jim, sorry, I'm going to interrupt. It's Barry. So does that mean you're leaving your actual computer running 24/7 all the time, and then the external drives are attached to it?
Yep. I virtually never turn my computers off.
Okay.
Draws some power, but I think when you turn them on and off, that's when you run into issues. That doesn't mean that I don't reboot them. Sometimes it's a little bit of a game, how many days can I go before I have to reboot? But, when you do reboot, both operating systems, Mac and Windows, do run a bunch of startup and shutdown scripts. They go and they get updates and they apply updates. They clean up temp files, throw out garbage. They do things like that when you reboot. So rebooting from time to time is definitely good for just plain housekeeping for the stuff that the operating system does behind your back. But by and large, I keep my computers on all the time. Besides, that way, whenever I walk into the room, all I have to do is tap the shift key or wiggle the mouse, and I can sit down and I have to work. I don't have to wait for drives to spin up and for operating systems to boot up and whatever. I can just walk in, do a quick Safari inquiry or check on something or send an email or whatever. So I'm just a really impatient guy, and I'm just a 24/7, 365 guy for my computers.
Any recommendations for laptop batteries?
Replacement?
Treating them. Do you have to power them down every so often?
The recommendation is with laptops that you do allow them to go frequently from 20% to 80% cycles. That is better than leaving them plugged in and turned on all the time. And on that front, I'm really bad. My laptop is plugged in and on its power adapter 99% of the time. And as a result of that, I've been considering maybe that I may get rid of my Mac laptop and go to something different simply because I'm probably abusing my battery. But my understanding is that, letting them, charge to 80 and then run down to 20 and, going through those cycles is better than keeping them topped up all the time. Now, I can tell you that the next version, I think, of Mac OS Catalina is finally going to come out with intelligent battery reporting on it. So if you're running a recent Mac laptop, the next version of Catalina is going to give us some more information on that. I'll be very interested to see that, because as I say, I think I've been abusing my batteries for a long time. And, you know, I may not have the same number of hours that I used to have, but it seems that as far as my laptop is concerned, I seem to have it plugged in rather than running it on battery most of the time. That's just me.
When it sleeps, does the external drive shut down, or it keeps spinning? When the laptop is closed, I'm talking about.
It depends on the hard drive. Some hard drives are designed to do that. Some hard drives are designed to keep spinning, and you just have to see. I mean, I couldn't make a general question or answer, because I think it depends on your hard drive. So what I would do, Bob, is close the lid or make it sleep and just watch what the drive does. But sleeping is not the same as powering on. You know, when I'm talking about powering on and that being a risk factor, you know, that's reintroducing power to the drive as opposed to just letting the hardware platter spin down.
Jim, I had a teacher that suggested I'm just looking, I have 8 physical external drives on my system, and I never shut it down. And although I have backups for every single hard drive, because they are going to fail, I just never shut down my computer. It's on 24 hours, 365 days a year. And I don't have a lot of failures for sure. So I think keeping it on is, well, based on my experience, it's the way to go.
Well, that and you know, plugging everything into an uninterruptible power supply, I think makes a tremendous difference. I mean, when I had my restaurants many years ago, we had computers in them and cash registers that were computerized. You know, we had dirty electricity in the restaurants all the time, because a lot of the big equipment, you know, whenever it was powered on and off, you know, would put spikes through the internal wiring. And we were always having trouble with the databases on the computers, and the cash registers were losing memory and whatever. And we finally went to an exercise where we put UPSs in for all the cash registers and for the computers. And then the problem went away, and we never, you know, had it again. So I have been a real fan of these things ever since then. And so, you know, I buy small ones for the laptops. They're like $40. And I think I have 2 of the larger ones, which probably cost me about $170, that the desktops are plugged into, and the hard drives. And I think it's made a tremendous difference.
Hey Jim?
Yeah, Paul.
Just one question. Why would you put a UPS on a laptop? Because even if the power does fluctuate, it's going through a power supply and on a battery anyway.
I mean, I think that's a fair question. The laptop certainly isn't going to flicker because it's going through its own battery. It's just that the UPS is on the floor and it's got outlets, so I plugged it into it.
Oh, okay. Because I usually just size my UPS for what I need. And here in Markham, we used to have just power flicks. So I just had a very low wattage UPS, but I also put a UPS on my network as well.
Oh, for sure. I mean, having it, you know, having your router plugged into it is great, because, you know, otherwise, well, I mean, you need to plug your cable modem or your fiber modem into it as well. Everything does. But then when the power fluctuation occurs, neither of those boxes, you know, see it. And so your internet stays up. It's not a question that your internet goes down and then everything in the house, you might have to run around and power cycle it all because the addresses get all screwed up on it again and so forth. I mean, there's an awful lot to be said for keeping the power running on devices. But one caveat on UPSs, battery backups, you shouldn't plug a line print or a laser printer into them. Inkjet printers, I think, are fine, but laser printers like HPs and stuff like that have a fairly heavy power draw when they start to print, and they can brown out the UPS. and you know, basically cause everything else to go offline. So laser printers basically have to be left to wild electricity. But I can tell you that my big HP printer, which is the one behind me here, is on its own little dedicated UPS so that it gets clean power. Because whenever it gets a power flicker, it's like 35 minutes before that thing's ready to print again by the time it does all its power on self-checks. So HP's recommendation is to power it 100% of the time. You can put it to sleep mode, but they want to power it 100% of the time.
Well, it's after 4 o'clock now, and I think
It's 3 hours.
I'd like to get outside for a few minutes before my next session, which is a happy hour.
Thank you very much, Jim. Enjoyed it very much.
Yeah, that was very good, Jim.
Okay, well, I hope that it was helpful. Again, my email and it's always open. My phone is always open. I know some of this stuff is scary when you look at it. Just give me a call. I'm thrilled to help.
Jim, thank you very much. It was an amazing presentation. Just loved it all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Barry.
Thank you, Jim. It was very detailed.
Okay, thanks, that's all.